So, what I want to say to parents is make the world safe in your home. Like, don't care about outside of your home or what anyone says outside of your home, I should say. Make your home safe. And I can't, again, talking to parents of autistic girls recently, I can't tell you how gratified and touched and emotional it made me to hear that, so many parents are just doing exactly that.
I really appreciate you joining us.
Either work or get related.
Why is this happening? What does the child need to express themselves?
How can we help understand them? Here's a way to look at autism in which your child is not a problem that needs to be fixed.
That's that shift in language that's so important.
The danger for undiagnosed girls, that I heard that phrase. Now I'm thinking, okay, for our audience listening, for parents, what does that mean for parents?
To your point, Daniela, unfortunately, we do see high rates of mental health challenges, higher in autistic populations than non-autistic. Even, unfortunately, suicidal ideation. There's a lot of research because the research community and clinical community are aware of these risks and they are troubling. And I don't want to, I want to just say that to parents who want to be in the know. But given everything, sort of the picture you've painted, Daniela, I'm wondering if like we could sort of speak to how could parents, if this is a world that isn't ready to fully accommodate and accept neurodivergent people, and parents want their kids to be safe, but they want them to be authentic and thrive, like I'm kind of trying to say, here's these statistics so you're aware, but also where's the hope and where's the path forward?
So the first thing that comes to mind is to like not do what my parents did. But I would say when they first raised me, because I'd like to give a redemption story to my mother. Like I mentioned, my dad passed away before he could benefit from this like miraculous know-how of mine. But my mom has like completely almost reparented all of us. And I have two sisters. I'm the third, I'm the middle child. And we're all in our late, like above 20 in our 30s. Like, and our mom is reparenting us in a sense as well as she can. And it's just like, I couldn't, essentially what I'm saying is that because it didn't feel safe at home, it's like there was no safe place ever. So what I want to say to parents is make the world safe in your home. Like don't care about outside of your home or what anyone says outside of your home, I should say. Make your home safe. And I can't, again, talking to parents of autistic girls recently, I can't tell you how gratified and touched and emotional it made me to hear that, so many parents are just doing exactly that. Like here we will not force them to eat things. Here we will not. And going against even their culture and even their parents telling them that they're raising bratty, spoiled children. I was so gratified to hear that, parents want to accommodate and understand their children. And I think that's like the first place, is to believe and to understand, and to make those accommodations. And even for me, it's never too late. I think something that I realized is that as an adult, as I was kind of discovering this from my family and seeing how far the autism spread, so to speak, in all of us, I just was so clear that, I think, my own parents were living masked, stifled, disassociated survival lives. And I certainly, as an adult, had a lot of compassion for them and their generation and was so deeply moved and deeply healed by my mother's attempts to reparent and to reaccommodate us. And she can never go back to when we were 5 and I needed to learn how to do math. But her support and letting us lead with what we need and supporting us has been huge. And I just think that starting out that way for your child is certainly very important. And a lot of parents are telling us that, and we've been seeing it. I mean, it is all over social media, in my social media, I should say. I don't know everyone's social media, but a lot of these parents see their kids and are like, they do that like doodaloo, doodaloo. What is it? The Twilight Zone of just like they see their past and da, 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 da. And we hear this in the interviews when their parents are like, "But you were just like that." And why is your daughter getting diagnosed? You were just like that. I'm just like, guys, can we have a clearer sign that where there are autistic children, there are autistic parents? And that's is the other prong of my advice. Is just where there are autistic children, there are autistic parents. And if you are getting triggered by your children and you also would like to only eat chicken nuggets, and that's a joke, but like, like if you also wouldn't want it to be validated and listened to and would have liked to choose and resent maybe some, I like often resent when even my younger sibling, who again is in her 20s, it's not like I'm talking about a baby, gets something that I didn't, an accommodation. I'm just like, it, like so many feelings come up, and so many of these feelings I think could be smoke, right? And to follow the smoke to see if there's fire. If you were jealous of someone's of your child's accommodations, could you have needed accommodations too? Like, just be inquisitive and be open-minded to the idea that you might be living in a neurodivergent household. I think also would be helpful.
Okay, that's wonderfully said. That was great, and I think that leads really well into we didn't get a chance yet to talk about neurodiversity affirmation. What does neurodiversity affirming care look like? What does it mean? I would love to open that to both of you.
Do you want to start, Danny?
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's nice for me to start because Amber can kind of, I don't want to say correct me, but gently correct me if I'm wrong. So how I understand it is that there is neurodiversity. So the idea is that like if you look at a classroom, that is a representation of neurodiversity. Like there will be neurotypicals, there will be autistics, there will be people who identify as ADHD. There'll be students who have different experiences, different experiences, different diagnoses, and neurodiversity I think includes things like all type of mental health, right? They're all different. There are many roads to access this idea of neurodiversity. I think that's how I would define it, but I also think, and we'll speak to the fact that neurodiversity has become this like coded word. There's still a lot of stigma around autism and the word autism and autistic. There's less stigma about ADHD, even though, like, to me, they're this overwhelming, overlapped. And that's I think that. So it's a lot safer. Like if I was going on a date or something, I could say, "Oh, I'm ADHD," and they'd be like, "Cute." You're. I'm not sure that that's what they would say, but like, "Oh, you drink a lot of water and you don't know how to tell time," or something. Like there's like these common stereotypes about ADHD, which is that it can be this kind of quirky, like, but also late. Like I think ADHD has different almost like PR agents that totally don't do a good, like that totally don't represent the wholeness of what is ADHD and the true difficulties of experience that are like people with ADHD, what they're going through, right? Whether it's not having their medication right now and this Adderall not being available, and also just like how debilitating it is to have a different sense of time and all these coping mechanisms that you need to do to accommodate how you see the world. Like, but I do tend to think ADHD is a much more common thing. It's been used more commonly for many years. I mean, I'm no expert on it. I'm open to being educated about it, but I think my understanding is that these all fall under this idea of neurodiversity, for what the true definition is, but also that neurodiversity is kind of this coded word that people are using to say autism or to speak about autistic experiences. So there's that too. I don't know, Amber, what do you think? Did I get too
Yeah,
lost?
No, 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 it's okay. But I'm like, I'm just thinking as you're talking, I'm gonna give again, this sort of, I love the really, really big picture perspectives. Like, how did we get here? So from my perspective, I
Please.
will say, when I used to work as a pediatric occupational therapist, I would see families, I would see parents who sort of came into the autism world, right? Like their kid had had some developmental delays. Maybe they were in California seen at the regional center. Maybe they had speech delay or developmental delay, and eventually they got assessed. Okay, autism, right? And you sort of watch families go through that process. And something that struck me is that parents would understandably be like, okay, I don't understand this, but like, we're in it. We're going to help our kid. Here we go. What's
Mm,
the right answer? Like, what do we do? And then they're inevitably faced with this system of care sees these things as the problem and these things as the solution. This system of care sees these things as the problem and these as the solution.
right.
All of these systems are inherently inevitably pathologizing. And what I mean by that
Mm,
is that we have all of these diagnoses in the DSM, right? So if the families listening to your podcast have gotten a diagnosis, they have probably heard of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And we have all of these things I referred to earlier. We don't have a brain scan that's like, this person's autistic, this person isn't. We don't have a blood test. We don't have biomarkers. It relies on observation of behavior. And what gets tricky about that is, like Daniela was saying, everyone's spread out beautifully in society with all these different ways of being. And if you're going to label something as a diagnosis, which there's some merit to, arguably, right?
mm,
If we want to single out the kids that need certain kind of supports, we have to identify them, right? And Daniela has shared as an adult perspective how much it meant to her to recognize that about herself. It was very powerful. And lots of adults right now, lots and lots of adults are having that experience of it being life changing, to go, oh my gosh, this explains everything about me. I wasn't just dumb. I wasn't a loser. Like, there was a reason I struggled with those things, right? So I'm just saying that there's some, even though I'm using the word pathologizing, which is kind of
mm,
negative, it's kind of it's making a critique. There's also
mm,
value in going, among all these people out there, we're going to draw some line around some who are different in some way, right? And there's all these diagnoses in the DSM that change over time because they're not definitive, because we find out
right.
more, right?
Mhm.
But autism has for years and years from its inception been a disorder. It's been pathologized. It's been like, these are the problems that make you different from society. So then I mentioned earlier the internet, social media, people finding each other, people getting together, being sort of advocating for themselves. And part of what came with that is adults going, wait a minute. Yes, I struggle with motor planning and executive function when I get overwhelmed. Maybe some days I can do it, but my nervous system is a little bit finicky, or these things, I can't deal with these textures or eat these foods. But I also have these superpowers, like the way that when we say neurodiverse, it's your nervous system, it's your brain. The way my brain works. I'll just give an example because we have the most beautiful array of people in our lab. Some of our lab members can go so deep. I'll be like, hey, could you find for me? I really need to know XYZ from the literature. And they're like, I'm on it. And especially if they're interested in it, a special interest, they can dive deep and they come back up for air in a week. And they're like, okay, I'll give you the lay of the land, all of the scientific literature, because I read it all and I synthesized it. And here it is. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is as a scientist, that is the most valuable skill anyone on my team can have, right? Because you have to
Mhm.
really be able to not pay attention to anything else in your environment and dig really deep and be so motivated and interested. But that characteristic in an autistic child can look like restricted repetitive behavior. The child only wants to play with whatever, the child won't pay attention to whatever, right? So neurodiversity originally was a term that was like, wait a minute, we're not wanting to just pathologize. We want to also see that different brains work differently. And we started to see that in the tech industry, right? Like, people who
Mm,
succeeded in the tech world often, right, had the kind of brain who or STEM, right? And so that word was intended to be like a move away from the negative pathologizing. And then, as Daniela pointed out, what's super interesting is I feel like we're in a moment of kind of a little bit of a clash with the biomedical professional school-based clinical world and this online group that's getting more and more active. And people are reading memes online and going, that's me. I thought that, what? Like this, there's other people, right? So the whole ADHD, autism, OCD, these things that are getting put under the neurodiversity umbrella, that's not coming from science. That's actually coming from the community. The community is arguing for the blurring of boundaries as they are finding it in themselves and in other people. And I kind of just, I'm very curious to see where will this go, because even that term is being used differently by the community than by professionals. Professionals are still, and again, there's a need for it. Professionals are stuck to, these are the diagnostic criteria. This is where we've drawn the circle. So as Danny pointed out, yes, the broader autism phenotype, these traits run in families, but in the scientific world, they're making a clearer distinction than the community is. And I kind of think the community is going to be influencing the autistic community, influencing the scientific community, because that's been happening. But there's a little bit of it's not even a tension, but things are being differently defined by the scientific community and and autistic communities with regards to neurodiversity.
And it's funny because I have this joke that I think a lot of the science community are coded and masked, highly masked autistic people, but they're almost like the worst perpetuators of like social norms in science in the sense because they don't want to blur the lines. It's like it's just interesting time we find ourselves of like who has access to knowledge, whose knowledge is right, who is included, who's not. Like, is it self-diagnosed? Is it
Right.
self-identified? Is it another one? Is it a disability? Is it not? And these are all kind of conversations that are happening, I think, in the world
Mm-hmm.
online. Um, and I think I don't necessarily think it's a this or that. I think that is kind of just a dangerous. It's not this, it's that, which I think just tends to privilege a certain type of communicator or a certain position of um, of experience and doesn't. I mean, I don't think we're ready to categorize. I tend to think we're at this place where we're still almost gathering information again, despite there having been categorization years prior. And as we know it, there is fixed categorization of understanding. But I tend to think personally that we're actually in a stage of like re-problematizing and like brainstorming. Like everything should be allowed. Right now is the party stage. And then we can kind of group things together again down the road. But I don't think it's either or. And then a lot of it is semantics. Like people have different understandings of words as it relates to them, and it just it seems so impossible to kind of even group yet. But who knows down the road.
Right. I appreciate both of you sharing those perspectives. That's super helpful. And what I'm kind of gathering from what both of you have said, it's so complex, so nuanced. There are so many variables. Something I've been hearing a lot about is, okay, who's the expert in the field? Are we, we've been calling researchers or therapists experts, right? But then now we're having this idea like, oh, are you an expert, or are we now needing to amplify autistic voices? And so I think both of you kind of sum that up really nicely. And it also just reminds me of the beauty of social media. It's not always a great place to be, but there are some really wonderful things about it that, you can find community and people starting to go, like you, Amber mentioned memes, and you're like, oh, hey, that's me. So that is a really cool part of it. So I appreciate you both sharing that.
If I may,
Danny, yeah.
too, like expertise is such a dangerous thing to have, and I don't know. I think maybe I give a surgeon credit for their expertise. Like you're cutting me open and playing with my heart. Like I'll give you that. You know what I mean? Though I don't know many surgeons. And they're probably very focused, and God knows that they have this, what is it called? Special interest
Mm-hmm.
in scalpels. So expertise, sorry, I was just joking, is a funny word. Like who has it, who holds on to it, does it exist forever? Like, how do you keep getting, like, do you have to recheck your expertise? I find it most useful for me to be very clear about the niche of my experiences. Like, I don't know anything about childhood autistic experiences from a in the sense of getting help, getting services, OT, ABA. I don't know anything about that. No experience, no expertise there. I couldn't tell you if it's like, I couldn't tell you anything about it. I certainly think many autistic adults have very strong opinions and feelings about their childhood with those therapies. Very strong. Are they the experts? I mean, in that case, I certainly think their voices should be listened to first, but they're not generally considered the experts. It's the person performing the therapy, generally speaking. Um, and that is slowly changing, and there's a slow shift, but it's almost like we have to gain momentum. It's like in getting enough fish or to swim in one direction. You know what I mean? Uh, Slowly but surely, enough voices are gathering to create a position on that and are looking back and talking about it. But even as it comes down to the term of autism versus person with autism or autistic, even that is still kind of it's like expertise seems to be only important in the circles and hasn't even punched through to like main understanding or common understanding, like, because there's still a debate about person with autism or autistic,
Right.
and though tend to be considered that generally speaking most autistic adults like to be called autistic, though generally speaking that's not what the parents of autistic
Right.
people say. So there's a slow shift, and autistic children are becoming autistic adults, and expertise is now. That's not to say that a lot of these therapies aren't useful. Again, like, I would have really liked to learn how to like manage a lot of these things, and I think OT, and I'm like, I look back and I think my core strength should be better. I like there's a lot of things that I think an expert in their field would do, but expertise in autism I think is dangerous because it's too much power to deny or allow an autistic experience through diagnosis. And I really am skeptical of right now the state of therapies and diagnosis criteria and those creating diagnoses, certainly for adults and certainly for children, because as we know, like, girls are later to get diagnosed because they don't necessarily meet the same criteria. So essentially, again, like I said earlier, I mean, I think we need to expand before we fight over who's experts over things. And I have real concerns about the state of our diagnosis practices, and just the power and privilege it affords the one person to be in control of that.
You bring up such an interesting point. Amber, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of play off of this idea of expertise that both of you have spoken to, and I'm just sitting thinking as I'm hearing both of you, and I just wanted to touch back. I alluded to earlier, because knowing who your audience is, a lot of parents, right, who are kind of entering this, and again, I just remember watching when I was an occupational therapist, watching families enter this and then become so confused because they're told, kind of to both of your point, this is an expert saying this is what your child needs, but this other expert is saying this is what your child needs. And then if you are exposed to these conversations online by autistic adults, if you're interested in hearing what autistic adults have to say, that might be very different, and it's confusing. And I saw so many families just kind of go, what's the answer? Why am I getting different answers? And when I was a therapist, I became very passionate about trying to help families understand, um, there are different therapeutic approaches. There are different therapies. And even within those different therapies, there are very different theoretical approaches. There's different ways of viewing what the child needs, who the child is, and how to help them get there. And families don't always know that. And I watch some families, um, understandably, it's like, well, this is what the experts are telling me my kid needs. It doesn't feel right to my family. This is not how I parent my kid, but it must be right because an expert is telling me. And I became passionate about trying to just help families know you have some choices. Now, sometimes your choices are limited by funding, insurance, but just that because a professional is telling you and they have the quote expertise, this is what your child needs. First of all, there's very different ways of looking at it. And second of all, there these as probably all of your audience is starting to learn if they didn't already know, the spectrum is quite broad. There are people who are autistic who look very different from other people who are autistic. And research has not done a very good job of delineating that. So sometimes an evidence based practice, as a researcher, I have to ask the critical question, okay, that showed that there was good evidence, but for whom? For which type of autistic people? Because there are differences. And there's a lot of research trying to look at what are meaningful subgroups. And I think we probably will at some point have different subgroups that we're right now calling autism, right? And that would help us better know what kinds of interventions help which people. We're not there yet. But this idea of expertise, I think the one thing I would love to leave your audience with is go with your gut and listen for a lot of kinds of expertise, and like don't despair if you're understandably confused because you're like I'm getting different advice, right? Because you will get different advice and there might be therapeutic modalities that fit better with your family and will still be good for your child. And so sometimes looking around and then listening, like Danny said, to the adult autistic adults, which you can easily find if you get on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. You can hear those conversations if you want to. There's books written by autistic adults. There's lots of ways to find out what those different lived experiences are. But I think for parents to feel empowered to then sit there with it and bring together what feels right for your child, because only you know your child. Like no one knows your child the way you do. And it broke my heart when I would see families trying to like fit their family and their child into this mold that was not actually good for their family. And it's kind of devastating because it wasn't the only right way. And it wasn't the right way for that family, honestly. Like what works for a family will be best for the child. And so just that idea of like, don't despair when you get all these different kinds of expertise because you will. So many people have opinions and some are evidence based. But again, even if it's evidence based, you have to ask the critical question about how is that research done? Like, I would want to dig in and find more about it because there's some evidence based practices, for example, that might really support a child sitting in a chair for longer, but or some external marker, right? But what is that? What do we know about evidence-based practices that help the child self-regulate and some of the internal emotional processes, right? So it's nuanced, is all I'm saying.
So that being said, I think also something you should know is that there is in the, like I think disabilities movement or history, and certainly in the autism history, um, as we know it, there is a dangerous precedent of categorization and certainly of hierarchical categorization of just what type of autistic is beneficial to society. And I don't think that we're beyond that point societally to just to kind of Amber's not saying this, but I'm just saying, like, for example, just so you know, there still is such danger with categorization, um, because of its history and because history isn't so far away and history has a way of repeating itself. All it to say of just, there is a dangerous road when you walk about, when you try to describe the creature that it is, they do this, they don't do this, because inherently the anthropologist isn't unbiased. And so we give value to different traits. Well, if they're very communicative, if they can make money under capitalism, then they are a higher level of person. And we just know how where that road leads in the past. And I also wanted to add too that for example, in the case of Latino parents who have such a cultural respect for authority, like imagine navigating, therapies and different experiences and different types of advice and experts and not knowing who to believe, but wanting to believe the doctor. Like there's just it's so complex. Every level of life remains so complex. And not everyone is at kind of equal footing, and not everyone is safe still, I don't think, like, and those are just perspectives I bring as like a lifelong suspicious and lifelong chronically in survival mode autistic who is not sure to put her next foot down because my dad taught me that it wasn't safe. You know what I mean? And though that was a scary thing to learn as a child, um, I certainly see the world differently, about safety, access to safety, and the privilege of assumed safety. And a lot of it can come down to the language you speak, how you look, your last name, and also, and in the case of autism and categorization of how you function. To me, it's still a complicated time out there. I work with Amber as a consultant, and before that, I worked in research, but I wasn't out as autistic before. And so I had this thought of like, will I be hired for other work? Could I get another job anymore now that my name's out? You know what I mean? Like, as autistic, because there's discrimination in the workforce, like nothing to deny.
Yeah.
Like, am I limiting my prospects? Like, I used to be able to mask. I could have masked to get a job. Is it safe? Will I be able to get a job that's not in autism now that I'm out with my name as autistic?
Mhm.
Like, those are things I think about because that's just the reality. Like, I'm not thinking of it for fun because I'm making up a world that doesn't exist. This is the world that exists. Like, am I limiting my opportunities, financial opportunities, to exist safely because I've shared that I'm autistic?
Yeah.
And people and my name and face are out.
Yeah.
Like, those are true realities, and and I give that context to explain why I'm suspicious, scared, and not ready to be optimistic to parents, in all aspects. And I'm like, be more suspicious.
Yeah, no, yeah, I want to say, first of all, I really appreciate that perspective too, because, like we've mentioned, children grow up to be adults. So I do think it's totally fair to talk on the autistic adult experience and all of these, because that kids grow up, right? That's what happens. What is an OT? For an occupational therapist, for our parents, um, we want to raise awareness of what resources are out there, what some of these professionals in this space are. So, Amber, I would love to hand it to you.
Sure, yes. So I'm an occupational therapist and OT by training, even though I do research now. I'm very happy to share with your audience kind of what that is, so they can consider whether their kid might benefit from OT. So what's very, very confusing about OT to all realms of OTs work with all kinds of different clients, and it's across the board confusing that use the word occupational because most people think like paid work that adults do. They think, why does my child need to get therapy for their occupation? They don't have one. So when we say the word occupational in OT, it's actually this older kind of use of the term that really means like how we occupy ourselves. It's the meaningful things we do every day in our worlds. So sometimes people think about our occupations like we do work, we also play and have leisure activities, we take care of ourselves, we do self-care, and lots of other categories, right? But those are just a few. And so OTs started working with autistic kids years and years ago. And when we think about what kids do in the world, they play. And they need to learn and grow and develop, but they do it all through play. And so OTs for children look a lot at their function and how their nervous system and their body needs to all work together to do things, to have motor skills, right? So it could be things like motor planning. If there's a task that requires 5 different steps, some kids struggle to sequence the steps of the task and get them all done. Some kids struggle to imagine in their mind the steps of those tasks and then see them through. Um, Again, thinking about your nervous system and sensory input, some of what OT looks at is just, does this child struggle to stay calm and regulated because the texture of their clothing is so bothersome? or those they have a lot of auditory sensitivity and there's sounds going on that they can't filter out, or is this child a quote picky eater because they can't stand the textures of certain foods. It affects fine motor skills. Sometimes OTs work on handwriting, sometimes OTs work on zipping up a zipper or doing fine motor skills. And sometimes you might see, if some of your audience has kids that are already in OT, they might be in a sensory gym doing an obstacle course. So it's going to just ideally, a good OT often looks like fun, and parents might be like, "What in the world are they working on?" But I will say that OTs have a plan, and it's great to ask your OT if they're not sharing it with you. They have a plan of really trying to help that child have self-driven motivation and to do something. We call it the just right challenge. So there's actually something very powerful for the brain and nervous system when I'm like just at my limit. It's like a little bit hard. It's like not that easy for me, but it's not way up here. And I'm
Right.
so motivated to do it. A really magical, beautiful thing happens in our brains, which have plasticity. And so sometimes even just an obstacle course, if it's the just right challenge, is really getting a kid to a place with their motor planning or executive function or mapping out the steps to a task or staying calm and regulated to do a fine motor task, or as Daniela mentioned earlier, core support and strength, sitting upright, the coordination to drink and coordinate and swallow. So it looks really varied, but OTs are trying to think about what do kids need to do at school, at home, and really trying to help them, ideally through play, get the foundation that they need. And then if it's okay, Tavia, who's a parent of an autistic young man, really wanted to share, and I was so excited that she had this expertise. Um, so Tavia shared that her son Angel, who's now a young man, at school he would use weighted vests, take out time to do certain exercises with his peers or with a one-on-one aide in elementary school. He would also run errands for the teacher to give him the input. I imagine she means carrying something heavy or pushing something heavy. And then she said at home we used and still use sensory balls, trampolines, long walks. And when he was little, the OT taught me how to have him push into her safely without ramming into me in the kitchen. Now, as my son is older, he's now equipped to know how to provide himself with the sensory input he needs when he's feeling overly stimulated.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing, and please thank Tavia on my behalf.
Sure
I'm
will.
so glad she was able to share her input. Thank you. And
Absolutely.
then as we begin to kind of wrap up this piece, Danny, I know you had something you wanted to say, so please go ahead, and then I think we'll
Yeah.
probably wrap after that. So go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I was really struck by Amber saying self
Mm,
determination because of a high masking, late identified autistic adult. All of my self determination was actually motivated by outward forces, that being my parents. And it was either usually a fear or rewards. And I just wanted to point that out again of why diagnosis is so important for young children and getting kind of the help they need and the way they need it, because if I don't have, if someone's not making me scared, or if there's not a reward, I don't know necessarily on my own how to nurture this idea of self-determination. Certainly as it comes to food, for example, like I don't know if I'm a picky eater because I was made to eat everything. So again, like we might not see the benefits of what we're giving our children in these kind of accommodations and getting them to feel confident to eat. But if you choose to skip that, the consequences down the road are, really disordered eating and this unable to kind of know how to help and feed yourself and just greater consequences, I could say. Or so really just an example of why OT is so helpful for
yeah,
kids.
yeah, no, thank you, Daniela. That's such a good point. Do you have any final words that either of you want to share?
I'll just start by saying that I really love my
Mm,
life. Like I love my point of view, I love how I see things, and just that I had to learn to do that. So if you're encouraging your kid to love their point of view and love how they see the world, I think it would make it all the more easier for them. Um, and and that being just the easiest thing and also the most impactful thing, even to me in my great many years, just to be validated in how I see the world is just like a love language, and I'm very happy and love my life. And there's definitely I live a very happy life in that sense. I want to share.
And as kind of to related to your point, Daniela, I'm just thinking of the parents that are potentially listening to this, right? And things really are changing. As much as there's a lot of problems that Daniela and I have sort of said, these are cautions, these are problems, these are where we would like to see society go. However, things really are changing, and unlike even like 10 years ago, parents can find so many different resources in different places. And so again, I'll just say, keep looking, because there's a lot of different perspectives. And if you find some that don't resonate with your family and how your values and how you have been wanting to raise your child, just because an expert is saying it doesn't mean it's the only way to go. And there's such a richness now of professional expertise of different kinds. There's also a lot of lived experience expertise. You can find books, you can find social media accounts. And I know so many people, parents, autistic adults themselves, who have found such powerful encouragement and support and resonance with their values in looking for different, even just like Instagram accounts, right? And so I would just encourage your parents to keep looking until they find sort of the combination of resources that fits. And I guess the last piece, because I would see a lot of parents go through this, it's like your child gets diagnosed and you're like, what is, it's like a professional has told you this thing about your child. But then so many times I would see parents, it took a minute and they'd be like, wait a minute, this is still my child. Like, this is still my child I've been raising. I know them like no one else does. So just because, again, there's a lot of nuance. Daniela has spoken to the importance of diagnosis, and I agree. And at the same time, diagnoses and that world can be pathologizing. So just encouraging parents to be like, no, this is still your precious, wonderful, maybe quirky, delightful child that you've known and loved. And it's just about helping them find their way through the world in a way that they can have like a vibrant life. And like Danny said, love things about themselves, the way they think, or the way they whatever their superpowers are, right?
Thank you both so much. You have been so inspiring to talk to. I'm so pleased that we were able to speak with each of you today. And again, thank Tavia for her input. This was wonderful. I'm so glad we got the chance to speak.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.